Today I thought we covered the top 10 tools or concepts of Lightroom that you should know to make your photo editing process immensely easier. You don't have to be an expert at Lightroom, but as long as you know these top 10 tools, it's going to be pretty simple for you from this point on. So let's just get right into it. The first thing that you're going to need to know is how to import photos and how to export them. So I'll group that into one topic. We're going to go ahead and click the plus button, click on Browse, and then select what you want to import. So for example, you could click on the first one, hold down Shift, click on the last one, and that'll select everything. You could then click Review for Import. And then if anything was previously added, it will let you know that it was previously added. If you haven't previously added it, then it will have a little check mark next to it. You could select whatever you want and click on the blue button up here that says Add to Photos or how many ever photos you have. I'm not going to click that button because I've already added the photos. And then similarly, once you're finished with this whole thing, you can click File, Export, and you can export, for example, this photo, or you can go down here, you can click on a photo, hold down Shift, go over how many ever you want, or you can click on a photo, hold down Control, click to select an arbitrary number of photos, and then you can, for example, from here, right click on any photo and click on Export, and that'll tell you export 6 photos. All it does at that point, you can select your settings. For example, I exported JPEG in full size, and I'll click on Export 6 photos and select where I want to export them. But we're not going to do that just yet. What we want to do is actually start editing some of these photos, and we'll edit one photo this time so that you can see how to use the rest of these Lightroom features. So that was number one. The second thing that you're going to want to learn is this panel over here, specifically the light panel. Light/edit, I kind of grouped these into the same thing. And the number one thing that I always click is auto, because it gives me a good baseline to kind of start off with, and then I'll start tweaking it from there. So I'm not really happy with it, just made it too dark. I guess it was focusing too much on these features right here. And I'm going to increase the highlights back up, even though it may look overexposed to it. It doesn't to me. The shadows, I may decrease them ever so slightly. Normally the blacks I like to decrease a little bit, whites increase. Highlights I'll add a little bit, maybe just keep it around the middle portion just because it's completely blowing out my arm right there. And that is a good starting point. So that's the first easy one. Second one is right below here under color. I like to play around with the color mixer just because I can make the photo pretty unique to the style that I like. If you look at these Instagram photos, most of these things are completely unnatural looking. I mean, they look really good, but they just don't look natural. You're never going to see just 2 colors in an environment, especially a landscape, and they'll strip out every other color besides just, for example, green and brown or orangish, and they'll just focus on those colors and convert everything kind of else into that. So I kind of like to do the same or very similar thing. I'll look at all these unnecessary pinks, for example, right here. We're gonna get rid of those, the purples. I also like to strip the purples out, the blues. I like to, a lot of the times, just take them out completely. Sometimes it doesn't look natural. This time it still does. Aquas, especially in windshields, if you're working on any kind of car photography, I like to take those out. And then greens, I like to kind of tweak those where they look like this darker green color. Decrease kind of the luminance a little bit and decrease the saturation. So I kind of like them around that range right there. You may have a different style, but that's just me. Yellows, I like to almost remove the yellows, but especially around here, around this tree, if I remove it too much, it just looks gray, so I'll kind of keep that in there. But I do want to get rid of this yellow that's underneath here, and we'll get rid of that later. I also want to kind of bump this yellow up that's right here, here, but again, we'll do that later. Orangish, for the most part, is just my arm. I feel like I look too tan in this photo. I'll just decrease the saturation ever so slightly. And then the reds, for the most part, is just popping out where they need to be, so I actually might increase this ever so slightly. With the exception of this red right here, I may remove that and that. We'll see. So that's the third thing that I like working on. The fourth panel that you're going to want to look at is the effects. And usually you add a little bit of texture and it looks just like the photo just, started popping out. And you also modify the clarity ever so slightly. If there's any kind of that whitish look in front of it, like a foggy look, you can use dehaze to kind of get rid of that. So if your photo kind of look like that, you can increase it ever so slightly and remove a lot of it. And then vignette, if you kind of want to focus in on something, which in this case, we do want to kind of focus in on this, but not too much, nothing excessive, because I kind of like everything that's kind of surrounding this. I think this does a good enough job focusing in on the subject itself. On this page, we'll look at one more thing, which is detail, and I just like to increase the sharpening ever so slightly. And then if there's any kind of grain that's going on, I'll do some noise reduction. I don't want to go completely crazy because then it starts looking cartoonish, but just a little bit here and there just to kind of remove any excess grain. And that's it for this grade. Number 6 is the crop. So as you can see, I actually did not take this photo. This was from a video. So I screenshotted it, and I'm at this point right here. So I have multiple screens. That's why it's screenshotted 3 things at once. So I just needed to crop out just the image that I screenshotted from my video. So you'll select the crop for Instagram. There's also this pretty cool 4x5, 8x10 crop, which will give you that Instagram look. This is almost doing like a square. What we want to click is this rotate aspect ratio, where it gives you that nice Instagram look. And then you can scale it down, and it's always going to scale towards, for example, Instagram, if you want to maximize your real estate on Instagram. So let's see how that looks. If we crop it, that actually looks pretty decent. So I may actually keep this at this kind of crop, and I may just move it a little to the left because I feel like all this stuff is kind of unnecessary over here if all we're focusing on is just adding the oil. Let's just make sure that I did not get rid of anything up here. Boom, and we're good. And that's pretty much it for the crop tool. You can go here, you can look at some of the presets, you can do your own custom one, you can do as shot, original, whatever, but there's really not much to it. Next on the list is the healing brush tool, and that usually deals with if you want to remove some spots. So let's say we want to remove this spot. We can increase the size of our brush, our healing brush, by going over here and adjusting it, or you can use the square brackets on your keyboard. The left square bracket reduces the size. So you just click on wherever you want, and it'll find the best match, and it'll remove some of these blemishes. You can also click and hold, kind of drag, and what it'll do is it will try to find an area like that it will kind of overplace. We'll remove that. We'll maybe remove that smudge right there. Maybe those smudges. Maybe even this whole thing. I don't know. I don't like it. Control Z to undo. And then maybe that smudge right there. So that looks pretty decent right now. And the only one that I'm going to remove is this big one, because I don't think it does really anything for it other than to kind of mess it up. Number 8 is a very important one. So once you're done with these quick adjustments, then you go to your brush tool. So I use the brush tool a lot. You can select a specific area. So for example, if we want to just paint over a specific thing, like let's say we just want to paint over this. I'm just holding it down, holding my mouse down, painting over it. And this little blue dot appears. If you scroll over it, you see what you kind of painted over. So then you can kind of modify up here, whatever you need to do. And then you can go over here and just target that specific spot. So if you need to increase, decrease exposure, contrast, highlights, white, texture, whatever. I'm going to Control Z, and I do kind of want to focus on that, but what I want to do is I want to increase the texture. I want it popping out a little bit more, and the clarity. I really want that to be the focus. That's pretty much it for this brush. I like to click out of it, click back in. A new brush, sometimes it just copies over all the settings from the previous one. So I'm going to reduce my brush size. And this time I'm going to go down and I'm going to select saturation, just bring it all the way down. And I'm just gonna paint over some of these spots that I don't want any saturation on. So for example, I really am not a fan of this red reflection on up here. Kind of like this one down here, but everywhere else, not really. And then we'll also remove any kind of saturation from these areas right here, as well as this portion over here. I kind of just like the red, the yellow, the green back here, that's fine, and this yellow right here. Okay, so now we've removed the saturation from there. We can actually, as you can see, I clicked the new brush and all the settings are copied over. So I kind of want to keep the settings copied over because the first saturation, what you do, it will not do everything 100%, but you're going to have to do a second saturation brush. And just kind of go over all the areas that you want any kind of saturation to be removed from. So that's pretty much it for me. Then I'm going to do a third brush, and then this time I want to increase the saturation in a few areas. So I want to increase it just on this yellow right here. I want to make that yellow just pop. As you can see, it's pretty much doing that. And I also kind of want to increase the saturation ever so slightly on this dipstick. And then even on this red portion right here. I think this is possibly from the intake manifold. So kind of a few key points to focus on, and that's pretty much it for the brush tool. Next one, we're not actually going to use anything. We might. Let's see if I can find any use for the linear gradient tool. So you're going to just want to click and you get these lines and drag on the screen. So it goes from most intense to least intense wherever you're dragging towards. And let's see if we decrease the exposure. That basically just gives us almost like a little vignette down here and causes a little bit more of focus on the subject itself. So you can see what happens if I move it up. It just adds more of this effect to wherever I move this to. You can also click invert and it will just do the opposite, but we don't want to do invert. We just want to focus in on this. And then finally, we get to the radial gradient. So both the brush, or all three actually, the brush, the linear gradient, and the radial gradient achieve the same thing. It's just different ways to select stuff. So if it's usually something like for example, let's say we want to focus in on this funnel, I'll just select that real quick, and you can see if I scroll over it that that's what's being selected. Actually, there we go. That's what's being selected. I had the little invert clicked. So if I click invert, everything else will be selected. So again, you could do some pretty cool, interesting things. For example, let's say we just want to focus in on that funnel and just reduce the exposure everywhere. But I don't, so I'm good with that. And then I'm going to go ahead and click delete. If you need to use the radial gradient, that's a great place, especially if you're selecting, like I said, a subject and you just want to quickly do it. That's a quick approach to it. I guess I'll give you guys one bonus little tip, is if you want to see what you started off with versus what you ended up with on your keyboard, the backslash, you tap that and you'll see the previous and the after. So before and after photo, you can see how the greens change. You can see how everything kind of looks more focused on the subjects and everything like that. And that's pretty much it. That's the top 10 tips that I can give you guys for using Lightroom for quick editing, and I guess one bonus tip as well. I'll see you guys pretty soon where we actually continue editing the rest of these photos.